Sorry about that disruption. So where I'm going with that is that it just seems to me that the Hudson Bay Company has a lot of the same sort of players involved with it from Europe that we are basically fighting with in a way. And if you look at Ottawa and the way that Ottawa has been set up since 1672, Ottawa is basically a family compact. That's the way that Ottawa has been described since 1672. And so that means that the families that are running the Laurentian elites, they're all related to one another. They're all like an impact. And everything they do is kind of like consensus politics with Europe. Everything Europe wants, that's what they do. And they groom, their families are groomed to be in this position. And one of my earlier videos that I made, the Dark Horse, who was a child of one of the elite families, he came out and basically said that they have failed to groom another generation of themselves, you know? Like they have become very, very queer in Ottawa, very strange. Anyways, so the Sean Newman podcast this morning with Alex and Tom, I thought was really good and very interesting. And I agree with them. I agree with those guys. And I also agree that we should be demanding that the LCBO or, you know, the liquor be put back on the shelves. And because ultimately, even if we were to merge with the United States, what's going to change for the Canadian people? You know, we're going to keep our flag, or we're going to keep our anthem, we're going to keep our heritage, we're going to keep everything. The only people whose sovereignty is at risk is Ottawa. It's not the Canadian people. You know, nothing will change for us. But I also see signs that Ottawa kind of flipped quite a while ago. But they're very strange in Ottawa. It's really hard to read them. Very hard to read what they're really up to. They send the strangest comms out. So I think I'm going to walk back this way. Come on, Pops. Come. Yesterday I was listening to another podcast. They talked about how in Europe they've got like $400 trillion of basically uncollateralized certificates. Like Canada has a lot of collateral security because we're a rich country with resources, everything you need. We could be completely independent. But Europe doesn't have any resources. Come, Pops! Come! And apparently one of the things that they did to try to fix their problem of the lack of security for the pension funds was they used all the firefighters and EMTs pensions and said they had to pledge that as collateral security for their bond markets. So, but it's not enough. And so Europe is heading for this massive collapse. And, you know, you probably heard the theory goes that they tried to, well, a lot of people say that the reason that Ukraine is so important is because they want Ukraine to be, they want the rare earth minerals, they want Ukraine to be collateral security, they want a war so they can default on their debt and collateral security, and they want to take down Russia, who's got 70 trillion. But this is not believable, okay? It's not believable because I'll tell you why. Russia's never going to let Europe have any security or anything to do with Ukraine. They're going to probably take over all of Ukraine. But Canada, on the other hand, oh, and another thing about Ukraine, they have zero investment in Europe, zero. Europe has about less than 90 billion invested in Ukraine. Like they don't have that much exposure there. But in Canada, they have hundreds and hundreds of billions of exposure in Canada. Canada has over $1 trillion exposure in Europe. We are a stable country. We have massive resources, any kind of resource you want, we've got it. That's why my theory is that Ukraine is Canada, because to me it makes a lot more sense. It makes sense. It fits. What everybody is saying about Ukraine being needed as collateral security, or that has been pledged by the UK, I don't believe it. I just don't believe it. Plus, I see a lot of events tracking in Canada that track to Ukraine. So I think that they use Ukraine as a double meaning narrative. It's a narrative, but it has more than one meaning. Like there is something going on there between Ukraine and Russia, but it's not the only thing. Like it's not the, I mean, I'm highly, highly skeptical that 1 million men have been killed. Like, I just don't see any proof of any war, to be honest. There's nobody there. There's nobody reporting on it. We never see any war there. So why should I just believe what I see on a screen? I don't believe it. So here's my main concern. I'm just concerned that Ottawa is trying to negotiate this annexation, and the people don't know about it, or the people will not be consulted. Well, we weren't consulted about Confederation. We weren't consulted about 1982. We weren't consulted if Quebec should have a distinct society status. We never got to have a say on any of those things. We have the Statute of Westminster from December the 11th, 1931, which makes every single province a country in Canada. That would have been the time to break away from the Crown and forge a new federation without the Crown, but that didn't happen. And so the fact that Quebec is voluntarily participating in this confederation and they haven't signed on to it, and they benefit like $13 billion a year. There's no reason for them to be a have-not province. They don't pay any carbon taxes. They get a concrete plant without an environmental assessment. Like, well, with them not signing on to the Confederation Act of 1982, which basically was the BNA Act with a new name, Confederation Act 1982, and that they never signed on to it. It basically was never ratified. Like the Queen's proclamation clearly stated that they had to sign on to it, and they didn't. And the British North America Act is a dead document because Queen Victoria removed the enacting clause, and then a year later took over the Hudson Bay Company, which is the only real charter that we really have in Canada. And it's owned by the King. And it's filed for bankruptcy protection 3 or 4 days after Zelensky, Starmer, and Macron visit the White House. So, from my perspective, and these are just my conspiracy theories, okay? From my perspective, it looks like they're negotiating in secret behind the scenes for Canada. And when Justin was at the Queen's funeral and was singing Bohemian Rhapsody, and the part that he sang was Little Quite a While, I think Ottawa has obviously sent out enough comms to say that they have parted ways with the British. You know, the day after King Charles is coronated, May the 6th, 2023, May the 6th being the same day as little Archie's birthday, Meghan Markle's son, and May the 7th, 2023, Canada comes out with a new heraldic crown. So now we have snowflakes and maple leaves. And shortly after that, the British North America, before that actually, I think it was in November 2020, it might have been 2021, the British left their base called Battis in Suffield, Alberta, where they've been training for 50 years, some 1,200 square miles of their own base that they left. They never came back. They just finished packing up all their equipment there, I heard, and they're out. Ottawa sends out comms, that there are dead rats up to the ceiling rafters at 24 Sussex, and that they've had to gut the Prime Minister's official residence. Meanwhile, they're telling us this, but at the same time, they're at 24 Sussex. It's really not believable. But it's a comm. So what does it mean? Dead rats up to the ceiling rafters in the walls, dead rats filling up the walls. I'm pretty sure you can imagine. So there's a lot more signs as well. But that's just a few of them. Those are kind of my favorite. So when Justin becomes Prime Minister, he moves into the cottage, which is right across the lawn from the Governor General's palace. It's like a 20,000 square foot palace with private guards and everything. And yet he moves into a ramshackle 200-year-old cottage, not even 5,000 square feet. And they put $400,000 into fixing it up. Like $400,000 to fix up this old shack of a cottage for the Prime Minister and his family to live in. Well, that might be good for some paint. Maybe they had to make sure that the well and septic was working on. But just see your comments. Hi, everybody. So we have basically what we have in Canada is we've got this very tight-knit community running the country in Ottawa with their friends in Montreal and Toronto, and they don't care about the West. And, Quebec is voluntarily participating in this confederation as long as they get their $13 billion. And we're sending hundreds of billions of dollars offshore for all these humanitarian projects that we hear is unaccountable, going to secrecy jurisdictions. Well, you know what? I don't want that. I would like to join the United States just because I would like to have some accountability. The government of Ottawa does not define my heritage. They don't define who I am as a Canadian. My family goes back. On my mother's side, we go back to Missouri a few hundred years ago, but on my dad's side, we go back for hundreds and hundreds of years. Like forever, really. And we've served. My great-grandfather or grandfather was an Indian agent for the RCMP. My brother-in-law was in special forces. We've all served. And I don't think anything will really change. It'll just we'll be able to, because it's sort of like part of the great game to stifle economic development in Canada. There's lots of reasons why they would do that. They might even decide that it maybe will just wreck the economy. You know what I mean? Because it serves their interests in many different ways, right? If they can get chaos, they'll try to get order out of chaos, basically, is the, how they play the game. And, another thing, too, is I don't really think that Ottawa's very happy about any of this. Like, remember when Michael Wernick, he was the clerk of the Privy Council under Justin Trudeau, and he begged Jody Wilson-Raybould, he begged and begged her to get a deferred prosecution agreement for SNC-Lavalin, and she wouldn't do it. And then what do we hear a couple months later? That, his son, for the second time, tried to commit suicide at work with a gun, and it was the second time. at work, and he works for the government. Now, my sympathies to the Warnick family. Thank God he's okay and he survived it or whatever. But when I see things like that, I just feel like my government, is my government a hostage? Are the people that are running Canada in fear of their life all the time? This is what worries me. Like, do they, because they're a middle power, do they just get a call from the king and the king says, well, you got to do this and you got to do that, and if you don't do this and if you don't do that, I mean, it just seems like my government is not independent. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like I'm just worried about them. I'm worried that they, and they have to say and do the most ridiculous things. And sometimes I rationalize it and I think, well, they're very secretive. You know, they have a lot of control. They control the media. We have a vast police state in this country. So, you know, they're very ironic on purpose. They're very obtuse. They know that they look ridiculous, but they, you know, because they have to do it this way, you know, maybe because they have their own plans, like we don't see everything what's going on. And that may very well be the case. But I would like to have a real country, like my Prime Minister flies around on a plane and it says Government of Canada on it. It should just say Canada. Like if I'm a country, a real country, why doesn't it, and why do I have to send all this money? You know, offshore. So I feel like it's a dangerous job to be in politics in Canada. And if they are kind of captured and their lives are at risk, if they don't do what they're told to do, like Doug Ford, you know, he's in an accident, he gets sideswiped on the 401. You know how dangerous that is? He could have easily been killed. On January the 8th, all the bad stuff happens on the 8th day, by the way. So, was it a warning to Dougie? Like, I've met Doug Ford in person. I've also met Justin Trudeau in person. Frankly, I didn't really think Doug was that impressive. Justin was very impressive. He was very charismatic. Everybody was really happy to meet him that day. And Justin, I never hate on Justin because I feel like Justin really was groomed into this role. Even the H2O series and Trojan Horse, that's patterned after the Trudeau family. That show really is. And so I'm probably going to let this go now because I should pay attention to what pups are doing. But I just want to finish off on the Canadian military. Nobody knows anything about the Canadian military. Nobody. They're very secretive. They are very ironic. Nobody knows anything about those guys. And I'm going to put a link in the description for you to take a look at this, because she talks about that in her predictions, astrological predictions for Canada for 2025. The way the country was set up to have a vast, secret police. And that's what it's like in Canada. Like I had a friend who worked for the police for 33 years. And I know somebody else who's in the military, and they told me that there's secret police everywhere in Canada. They're everywhere. They're all over the place. Canada is highly secretive, very obtuse. Like nobody knows anything about anything. So I have a lot of confidence in the military, in our intelligence services. I do. And I'm not worried about those guys. And I think we have a lot of threats here. I think that there could be sleeper cells here. There could be all kinds of shady characters here waiting for the phone call, you know, if they don't get what they want. Like, we're the richest country in the world. We really are. Makes a lot more sense that they'd be bitching and screaming and crying at the top of their lungs about their collateral security in Canada than they would in Ukraine, where they'll never have a hope in hell of having anything there anyways in the future ever. Ever. Okay. I love y'all. Bye for now.